Well, hello, everyone. Good day. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Ensuring Books for Half the Sky, Why Girls Need Books. Thank you so much for joining us today for this high-level event, which is focused on the importance of education, books, and literacy as a transformative experience for girls around the world. My name is Carol De Silva, and I'm the Senior Advisor for the Global Book Alliance. The mission of the Global Book Alliance is to transform the lives of millions of children, to assist them with access to books, and work with public, private, and civil society partners to support innovations, best practices, and policies that will change the way books are created, procured, and provided. I'm delighted to be joined today by representatives from the UK, US, and Rwanda governments, as well as the World Bank, all of whom are keenly engaged in supporting, advocating, and ensuring change so that more girls get access to books and a quality education. So you might ask, why are we talking about girls and books today? Well, there are obviously many reasons. Girls' rights, which of course are human rights, literacy and its important role that plays in supporting societal changes, and the many data points we have that show what happens when girls have access to education, not just for themselves, but also for their families and their communities. So just 2 weeks ago, Nick Kristof of the New York Times wrote about the transformational power of education, especially girls' education. He stated, in the long run, a girl with a book is a greater threat to extremism than a drone overhead. Globally, 367 million primary school-age children do not possess the basic literacy skills necessary to thrive in society. And it is girls that face a greater risk of illiteracy than their male peers. Girls whose education is deemed less important than their brothers. Girls who have their school days shortened so that they can help at home. This risk of illiteracy currently translates into approximately 496 million adult women around the world being unable to read and write. Ensuring access to books and literacy for girls and women will have benefits for future generations. And like other programs targeting girls, focus on access to books is likely to be a force multiplier, contributing to reductions in infant girl mortality, ensuring better access to health, increasing the number of girls who go to and stay in school, and finally increasing women's agency, leadership skills, and engagement, all of which are related in some ways to reading. Literacy ensures that girls build confidence, develop self-esteem, and believe in their ability to achieve their dreams. And access to books is at the heart of literacy. But despite their importance, both print and digital books are largely absent or in short supply in far too many classrooms and in children's homes globally. Not only do we need to ensure access to books for girls, but we also need to ensure that the right books are being developed for girls. Books that promote equity, show girls in all of their power and their abilities, and support their agency as they go forward in life. The Global Book Alliance focus is on closing the book gap and ensuring children, all children, girls and boys, can access developmentally appropriate books in languages they speak and understand. Through its flagship initiatives, including the Global Digital Library, book supply chain analyses, the Begin with Books Award through the All Children Reading Grand Challenges, and support for publishers, The Global Book Alliance is working with partners to address the global shortage of high-quality children's books in underserved languages. With focused work by collaborators, funders, partners, and other supporters, we are all part of the Alliance aiming to increase literacy rates, support a healthier book market, and ensure girls have access to books to pave the way for greater economic growth, health outcomes, democratic governance, and peaceful and resilient societies. So with that, I'm really delighted today to host this conversation with GBA partners and colleagues who are paving the way. Just a reminder before we get started that we do plan to have a Q&A once we've heard from all of our speakers. So do feel free to send in any questions you have during the event. You can click on the chat button and write your question there. We won't be able to get to all of the questions, of course, but we'll do our best to respond. So now I am honored to welcome Helen Grant, MP and the UK Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Girls' Education as our keynote speaker. In 2010, Mrs. Grant became the first Anglo-African female Conservative MP. Her constituency is in Maidstone and the Weald in Kent, which I've been told is actually the Garden of England. In January of this year, Prime Minister Boris Johnson appointed Helen as his special envoy for girls' education. Helen has also been the Prime Minister's trade envoy to Nigeria since October 2020. Previous roles in government include Minister for Justice, Minister for Women and Equalities, and Minister for Sport and Tourism, as well as a member of the Justice and International Development Select Committees. Before politics, Helen was a family lawyer, having set up her own legal practice in 1996, specializing in family breakdown and domestic violence. Helen, we are delighted that you have made time to be with us today, and we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts on why girls need access to education and books. We're also very mindful that with the UK's presidency of the G7 and the meetings to come in early June, that your leadership as the UK representative will be core to meaningful change on this important issue. Now over to you, Helen.
Well, thank you very much, Carol, for that lovely introduction. And yes, my constituency, Maidstone and the Weald, is in the heart of the Garden of England. It's not quite the whole of the garden, but boy, it's gorgeous there. So you should visit sometime. But it's great to be with you today, and I would like to thank USAID and the Global Book Alliance for inviting me to make these opening remarks at this very important discussion. As you said in your remarks, literacy helps to boost self-confidence and self-esteem in our children, allowing them to go on and hopefully reach their full potential and to achieve their dreams. But we also know that there are around 496 million women in the world who cannot read and they cannot write, making it absolutely essential that we close the global book gap. And it's events like this that I feel bring like-minded people together that can really make a difference and can really move that dial. So I am genuinely, truly delighted to be with you today. I'm also honoured to be the Prime Minister's Special Envoy, as you mentioned, for girls' education. And my role very much is to globally champion his message that providing every girl on the planet with 12 years of quality education is one of the best ways of tackling many of the big issues facing the world today, like poverty, climate change, and inequality. And we believe that investing in girls is an absolute game changer. And we know that a child of a mother who can read is 50% more likely to live beyond the age of 5, twice as likely to go to school themselves, and 50% more likely to be immunised. We also know that girls who are educated are more able to choose if, when, and how many children they actually have. So girls' education is not only vital for women and girls, but it is also vital in levelling up society, boosting incomes, and developing economies and nations. Even before COVID-19 hit, sadly, the world was facing a learning crisis. And tragically, the pandemic has become one of the biggest educational disruptors in our history, affecting something in the region of 1.6 billion children at the peak of the pandemic in 2020. Many of these children are girls. Many of them will never return to school. Many of them will never even start school, lowering their chances of future employment and having decent livelihoods. And we all know too that out of school girls are more at risk of violence, sexual violence, early marriage, forced marriage, human trafficking, and the list goes on, all creating a very real risk of a lost generation of girls. And we need to work really hard, and we need to work together to make sure that that does not happen. For the UK, I'm delighted to say this has begun with leadership from the very top. This is something that's very, very close to our Prime Minister's heart, and he's put championing 12 years of quality education for every girl at the heart of the G7 presidency. And we believe that this will allow the transformative power of girls' education to get the priority and profile it needs and deserves, as well as the much needed financial and political commitments. Our Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, together with G7 foreign and development ministers, has also agreed 2 very important global targets, which include getting 20 million more girls reading by the age of 10 and 40 million more girls in primary and secondary school in low to middle income countries by 2026. This year too, I'm very proud to say that the UK will co-host with Kenya the financing summit for the Global Partnership for Education. And we're working very, very hard at the moment with our international partners to get the replenishment commitments needed for children's education for the next 5 years. We also know that education interventions must provide more than just learning. And the UK will continue to be a gender equality leader, tackling many of the issues that prevent girls from getting to school and staying in school. No girl should have her hopes and dreams dashed because she's been forced to marry too early or become a mother due to the lack of family planning advice. And I was able to see some of our aid work in operation in a recent visit to, in fact, just last week, to Ghana and Sierra Leone. And I'm sure our Alicia Hebert, who I know is on the panel, might make reference to what we saw too. But it was a fantastic visit, and we were able to see programs that were really not just improving learning for children, but also with specific measures included within the programs to address violence, to address disability, pregnancy, and other very serious safeguarding issues that can keep many girls away from school. I was also extremely impressed by the Minister for Education in Sierra Leone, Dr. David Senge, in driving through and designing the government's new radical inclusion policy. This policy seeks to ensure, among other things, the right of all girls to return to school should they fall pregnant. We also saw our teams in Uganda and Nigeria, how they'd been able to adapt their programs to keeping children learning, notwithstanding COVID school closures. They'd achieved this through home and community learning based projects, the recording of radio and TV lessons, and accelerated learning projects to help girls catch up with their studies and what they'd really lost out on for a number of other reasons too, not just COVID. We know the weight of the challenge with girls' education is very significant, but our ability to make change in the world, if we work together, should never be underestimated. The international community must, in my opinion, adopt a more ambitious and coordinated approach to girls' education. Governments must prioritise education reforms. They need to listen much more, again, in my opinion, to civil society and partner with technical experts so they can design reforms around real evidence of what works. We need to focus too much more on quality and secondary education. There were many girls that we met that were going to school, but they were sitting at the back of the class and not learning, and that's no good either. And very importantly, we must listen to girls. We must really hear them when they tell us what they want and what they need from their education. Politicians are very good at talking, but you know, we need to listen much more, and I'm very, very aware of that. Whether it's safer roads for safer walking to school, free sanitary products to help with attendance and confidence, or separate toilets for privacy. And last, but very importantly, our global leaders need to speak out much more, as our Prime Minister has done, on the importance of educating girls, explaining all of the advantages to girls and women, to their parents and children, their communities and their nations. Together, if we can make this happen, and I really believe we can, the human race will be in a much better place. Once again, thank you for inviting me to be with you, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for those moving words, honestly, Helen. I really appreciate the comments that you've shared with us, and it really sets the stage for the remainder of the webinar. So we appreciate so much you joining us today. With that, I would like to move now from the UK's commitment to its impact around the world. We welcome two speakers who will respond to the momentum they are seeing coming from global engagement by the UK, the US, and other nations. I'm honored first to welcome Dr. Valentine Uwamariya, the Minister of Education in the Republic of Rwanda, to provide her thoughts. Dr. Uwamariya has been the Minister of Education in Rwanda since February 2020, where she continues to build an impressive legacy for education across all ages. Previously, she was Deputy Vice Chancellor at the Rwanda Polytechnic, in charge of trainings, institutional development, and research. She also served as Dean of the School of Science at the University of Rwanda's College of Science and Technology. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from the former National University of Rwanda, as well as Masters in Chemistry from Witwatersrand University in South Africa. In 2013, she obtained her PhD from UNESCO and Delft University of Technology. Minister, thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking very much forward to hearing from you on this important topic. Over to you.
Thank you so much, moderator. Dear representative, Global Book Alliance, dear UK Special Envoy on Girls Education, dear Global Director, Education Practice, World Bank Group, ladies and gentlemen, and all protocols observed. The Ministry of Education in Rwanda believes that literacy is a transformative tool for girls around the world and appreciates the efforts by the Global Book Alliance and the work in supporting education development around the world. One of the most important investments we can make is to ensure that girls are able to stay in school, advocate for themselves, and navigate life's most difficult decisions while ensuring access to literacy for girls and women to pave the way to the benefits for future generations. Throughout their life course, girls and young women experience a series of gendered risks and barriers that limit their opportunities. For example, factors such as poverty, gender-based violence, discrimination, and unequal gender norms about girls' role in the society contribute to the unacceptably high number of adolescent girls who are excluded from a formal secondary education globally. Unequal access to education limits girls' opportunities to build their foundational and transferable skills. When girls are in school, gender bias from teachers, families, and male and female peers drive girls away from pursuing STEM subjects and from building the digital skills necessary to be competitive in a 21st century job market. Also, the cultural bias, gender discrimination and safety concerns discourage girls from learning, and these pressures become even more pronounced when girls reach secondary school. The government of Rwanda is committed to gender equality across all aspects of Rwandan life, including education sector. In addition to the national gender policy, gender equality consistently features as a cross-cutting principle in key national policies and instruments, including Rwanda's Vision 2050, the National Strategy for Transformation 1. Moreover, and most importantly, our Constitution enshrines the promotion of gender equality of all Rwandans. This includes equal right to education. Secondary education is not a luxury, but a must for all girls and boys. And quality education means integrating comprehensive sexuality education, as Rwanda has done in the new competence-based curriculum. Lastly, the education sector strategic plan for 5 years from 2018 to 2024, and the National Girls Education Policy highlights gender equality as a central component to achieving inclusive basic education for all, and beyond that, to ensuring that girls and women are appropriately skilled to contribute positively to the economic and social development of the country. Rwanda has made much progress toward realizing its commitments to gender equality in education. It has already achieved gender parity in primary school enrollment and the higher enrollment rate for girls in secondary schools. As we all know, the quality of girls' education is a major area of focus in terms of improving the retention, achievement, performance, and completion rate in post-primary and tertiary education, especially for girls from poor households. And the consideration of gender issues in education has led to an increased number of girls in STEM subjects. Free universal basic education was initiated and scaled up to 12 years cycle. This resulted in net enrollment of nearly 100% in primary for both boys and girls. To realize all these commitments, several initiatives and strategies have been put in place. Development of girls education policy in 2008. This is under review. There was introduction of free and compulsory 9 years basic education in 2009, which is extended to 12 years basic education today. The development of school health policy in 2014, the development of gender responsive pedagogy, the introduction of girls' rooms at school to facilitate hygienic and conducive learning environment for girls, specifically during their periods, the creation of the annual budget line for equipping girls' room with hygiene facilities, the integration of gender and comprehensive sexuality education in the competence-based curriculum. There was awarding, and still today, there is awarding best performers girl in primary living out examination and the best performers girls in TVET and STEM. There is also the sensitization campaign in secondary schools to encourage more girls to join technical vocational education and training, but also STEM fields. Most importantly, the access to books is at the heart of literacy, and reading is a foundational skill upon which all other skills depend, because literacy helps girls to build confidence, develop self-esteem, and believe in their ability to achieve their dreams. However, girls are facing a greater risk of illiteracy peers. This risk is currently translates into approximately 496 million adult women around the world being unable to read and write. In Africa, the book value chain has not been understood and recognized as the key factor that supports the creation, production, distribution, dissemination, storage, and use of the much needed reading materials that are at the core of literacy development. ADEA, one of the key partners of the Ministries of Education in Africa, is currently spearheading the formulation and implementation of national book and reading policies. And we are in full support of this effort that needs to be recognized by all who would like to see a sustainable provision of reading materials throughout the school system, and especially for special groups like girls and women in the society. Ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. To conclude, it is important that we ensure books can get into the hands of girls, and that teachers, parents, caregivers, and communities have the support they need to help girls meet their reading goals. Girls need life skills, mentorship, material support, family and community engagement through books and reading. All these are very important because they lead to thinking critically, empathizing and relying on themselves to comfort day-to-day challenges and make informed decisions. Through reading and literacy, girls discover their own strengths, advocate for themselves, and create a new and different path from the one that might be forced upon them. Thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to highlight these few words showing that Rwanda is committed to improve the girls' education. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Minister, for detailing the impressive impact of Rwanda's commitment to girls' education, and also for really identifying some key areas where challenges remain. In particular, I think your mention of the fact that the book value chain or book supply chain is not well understood. I think that's extremely important to our conversation today. And we really appreciate you highlighting all of the good work that Rwanda has been doing for girls specifically. So thank you for those thoughts. With that, I think we will move on now to our next speaker. Another global player working alongside governments on this issue is the World Bank, of course. And I'm very happy to welcome Jaime Saavedra, the Global Director of the Education Practice at the World Bank Group, to tell us more about the work that they are doing on girls' education, foundational literacy, and books. So Jaime leads the Education Global Practice at the World Bank Group. Before this, he served as Minister of Education of Peru from 2013 through 2016. Throughout his career, Mr. Saavedra has led groundbreaking work in the areas of poverty and inequality, employment and labor markets, the economics of education, and monitoring and evaluation systems. Prior to assuming his role as Minister of Education of Peru, he had a 10-year career at the World Bank, where he served as Director for Poverty Reduction and Equity, as well as Acting Vice President, Poverty Reduction and Economic Management Network. Mr. Saavedra holds a PhD in economics from Columbia University and a bachelor's degree in economics from the Catholic University of Peru. So Jaime, I would like to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
We hear you, yes.
Thank you very much, Carol. And at first I want to thank the Global Book Alliance for not only hosting this event, but all the incredibly important work that has been done during the years. We value a lot this partnership with the Global Book Alliance, with USAID, with FCDO, with the government of Rwanda, and so many others who are working on this transformational endeavor. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to discuss this issue, and want to add to what Helen said, that she was saying we need to bring, here together the like-minded, and actually we need to bring everyone. This is really a social, a critical development objective, and everyone has to be on board. And I want to add to what both speakers mentioned. Both have forcefully remind us of all the reasons why getting girls in schools and having them learning has an immense effect of welfare on all families and societies. And a girls' education is a right, but at the same time, it is an effective investment as a smart and effective investment to increase global welfare. And hence, it is one of the development challenges of our times. As an education team at the World Bank, girls' education is one of those issues that do not really allow us to sleep at night, given the huge challenges that we face. And there are many topics that we need to discuss when we tackle the issue of girls' education: school safety, sexual education. The development of comprehensive skills and all the breadth of skills that girls should acquire in school. But let me focus on one issue, which is the issue of literacy and the foundational skills. A couple of years ago, we at the bank, we constructed, working together with the UNESCO International Institute of Statistics, we constructed one indicator that we called learning poverty. And it was an indicator that the idea was to have something that could be simple and easy to understand by everyone. So this learning poverty indicator, basically capturing what the SDG 4 says, just calculates what's the percentage of kids who at age 10 cannot read and understand a text. And if you think, well, that percentage should be zero, right? All kids at age 10 should be able to read and understand a text. So if we call that learning poverty should be zero. in the same way that hunger should be zero, that extreme poverty should be zero. What we see is that despite the fact that in the last decade, there has been a huge increase in enrollments of both boys and girls, and even in low-income countries, I mean, and in many, even in low-income countries, we see many countries in which primary completion rates are almost 100%, or there has been good progress in terms of bringing kids to school. Now we know with the data that we have that being in schooling is not the same as learning. And then when we calculate learning and we see, well, what's that percentage of kids who are not being able to read and understand a text by age 10, the results were not great. And what we found was that that figure was about 53%. If you think, well, that's really a terrible number, right? That number depicts that we don't only have a problem, we really have a learning crisis, right? Because we're saying, look, half of the kids at age 10 cannot read and understand a simple text. And many of those kids are in school. So we do have a problem of access still, because not everyone is in school. We do have a problem of access in secondary, which is still serious, but we haven't solved even the problem of basic learning in primary education. Unfortunately, this has made only worse with the twin shocks that have hit education during the COVID-19 crisis. We have seen massive school closures, and at the same time that we have that impact of school closures because of the policies that countries had to implement to fight with the pandemic, we have the largest recession of the last 100 years, right? Which has an impact on government budgets and on family budgets in order to invest in education. We have never lived that twin shock in the last 100 years. All school closed in many, many countries, and in many low-income countries, we have about a year of schools being closed, and also the economic shock. Our projections is that that 53% that I mentioned could go up to 63% of kids not being able to read and understand a text on average. And obviously those numbers are much higher in sub-Saharan Africa than they are in East Asia, for example. Now, those are simulations, but already new data is trickling, real data, not simulations. And we see, for instance, that in the case of the state of Sao Paulo in Brazil, they are observing that the state is going back in about 11 years in terms of their progress in learning among young kids. So this is a serious crisis that we really need to continue working on it. And we have set ambitious targets for this. As the SDG 4 says, I mean, all kids should have quality primary and secondary education by 2030. But if we want to see something that is realistic, right, that can really move the actions of countries, what we said at the bank 2 years ago was a target that learning poverty rates, that 53%, should go down by at least half, right, between now and 2030. That is not easy. That is an ambitious target that implies a very fast increase in the rate of progress that we have seen in the last years, but actually it's what we need to do. I want to mention a couple of issues regarding girls' education, and I'm just not keeping up well the top of the time. But if we look at this learning poverty among boys and girls, when we look at primary education, the difference is not big. And actually, the difference favors girls. If we look at this 53% that I was mentioning, actually, it's a bit higher. Learning poverty is higher among boys. It's 58% among boys and 52% among girls. So girls do better in terms of reading in primary education if they are in school, right? We still have a problem in many regions, in many regions in the country and in the world, that girls are not finishing primary education, or sometimes not even attending primary education. So we still need to work on learning poverty, I would say, in terms of learning in primary education for all kids, all boys and girls. However, there are some specific issues for girls that I want to mention in the basic education system. One issue I want to mention is gender stereotypes. Books are a great window to the world, but if all our books about scientists have only males on them, it's no wonder that girls, they will not think, I mean, from a very early age, that they will not be good at science or at math. So we need to make sure that even in primary education, right, the books that we have with which we teach girls and boys, actually both, right, challenge the traditional gender roles so that both boys and girls know that everyone has the same rights, have the same possibilities, have the same opportunities and the same responsibilities. And it's very important to mention that sometimes interventions that want to improve the gaps that we see throughout the education systems regarding girls require changing the mindsets, not only of girls, but also changing the mindsets of boys. So if we want to act in reducing the relative position of one of the two genders, actually we need to work with on both. So we need to really be working regarding boys, regarding these issues, on boys regarding the issues of gender stereotypes. And the other issue that I wanted to mention is the dropout rates, right? We still see that particularly in secondary education, dropouts rates are still too high. In Nigeria, for instance, according to the latest data, it can be expected that about 2/3 of girls will drop out of the school system before reaching the last year of junior secondary. If we look at a country like Angola, by the end of primary schools, boys are more likely to have completed their studies, 60% versus 34%, and 63% of girls transition to secondary education, and only 40% of girls transition to secondary education. And then even a fewer number of girls will finish secondary education. So we really need to work, I mean, a lot in terms of completion of secondary education. We have a Girls Empowerment and Learning for All project in Angola that is basically about that. It's making sure that girls finish secondary education, and also that there's a second chance education for those who have dropped out of school. And let me finish with one point. We started a program called Read at Home, right? In the understanding that the education process is not only in school, but there has to be a continuity of the learning process from school to home. We were thinking about that project before the pandemic, but now with the pandemic, now it's even more clear, right? That education systems have to be resilient, right? Hopefully there's not another pandemic anytime soon, but there will be natural disasters in any of our countries. And we need to make sure that there is a continuity of the learning process from school to home. That's what we call the resilient systems. And in order to build resilient systems, we need to not only continue with our tasks to make sure that conditions at school are each time better. And as we know, the task is immense. But we also need to work as part of public policy to make sure that conditions at home are better. And sometimes we think about the huge differences that we see within countries, right? In terms of conditions at schools. Not all schools have the same the same inputs, the same technology. Not all teachers have the same type of support and training in schools. And we need to reduce disparities in quality of schools within countries. But at the same time, we need to see if we see those inequalities within schools in a country, what happens with inequality within the conditions within homes in a country. And there's that we see that in a rich or a middle class household, you will find books, and in a poor household, you will not find books. We have a number for Africa in which only 3% of households have more than 2 children's books at home. So, I mean, that is an area in which we really need to work much more. We launched last year the Read at Home initiative to get reading and learning materials at home quickly and efficiently, targeting families who are particularly targeting families who are hard to reach. And let me close mentioning 2 examples. In North Macedonia, our team has supported reaching more than 40,000 children aged 3 to 12 with storybooks at home. But a critical challenge in that experience in North Macedonia, if that had to be done in Turkish, in Roma, in Bosnian, in Macedonian, and in Albanian languages, right? Printing in 5 languages, it's much more complicated. And that's a challenge that we face in many countries throughout the world, in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia, in Latin America. That makes things much more complicated, but that's the way it is. Public policy is complicated. And we need to make sure that kids receive books at home and that those books are in their native language. And second, and with this I close, I wanted to mention the example in Senegal, in which our team has been working with the government to reach 1 million children. That's about 30% of all children below the age of 6. And we're starting with a focus on reaching children in 7 regions that have the worst early childhood education outcomes. But a critical feature of our intervention in Senegal is that it's not about making sure that there are books in the hands of children, but that there is a very conscious interventions to encourage parents, right, to support children, and that parents receive also the orientation and support, right, to be able to work with their children in that process of improving their ability to read. So those are just a couple of examples, but this is an intervention in 13 countries that I hope will expand, because I think it is a critical issue for all of us to make sure that in all schools, right, we've tackled these challenges of making sure that the supply chain is the right one, and we make sure that all schools have enough books for all children. But we also need to add to that challenge to make sure that all kids at home also have a book in their hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jaime. As a key partner to the Global Book Alliance, we know that the World Bank is very much focused on supporting girls' education. And I think, your comments have done a really great job of illustrating the complexity of this challenge and the kind of nuance in policy responses that we have to consider when we think about the intersection between girls and language, girls and age, right? And the differential needs that girls have based on their other sort of qualities and characteristics, right? And as well, thank you so much for highlighting the importance of accessing books both in school and at home, right? We're not talking just about textbooks, we're also talking about supplementary reading materials. So this is a very widespread and complex kind of challenge that we're facing, and I appreciate you raising all of those issues to help us think about it going into this next phase of the webinar. So we're now going to open up the conversation a little bit wider and invite 2 additional panelists to join the dialogue. They're both at the center of discussions at a government level on this subject. And so we're hoping that we'll have a little chat with our panelists, as they may be doing in G7 meetings, to understand in more depth why this issue matters and what they and their teams are already doing about it. So first, I would like to introduce LeAnna Marr. She is the Acting Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Bureau for Development, Democracy, and Innovation, and she oversees the Bureau's Center for Education. Working for USAID since 2004, LeAnna previously served as the Director of the Center for Education and as a USAID Foreign Service Officer, serving as Education Office Director and Program Officer in Guinea, South Sudan, and Macedonia, and Program Officer and Acting Mission Director of USAID Morocco. From 2007 to 2010, LeAnna served as USAID's Senior Education Advisor in the Office of Afghanistan and Pakistan Affairs. And previously, she worked as Associate Peace Corps Director in Guinea and as Executive Director of a nonprofit alternative education program in Washington, D.C. We are also grateful to be joined by Alicia Hebert, OBE, Director of Education, Gender and Equality, and Special Envoy on Gender Equality at the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Alicia has more than 20 years experience in international development. She has worked with a range of organizations, including multilaterals, academia, And since 1999, the Department for International Development, now the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office. She has extensive experience in the field in sub-Saharan Africa and also Asia, including in fragile countries. So I'd like to welcome both of you to the conversation. Thank you for joining us. And now we're going to have a bit of a conversation. We have some questions that we've prepared. I'll pose them to one of you to sort of kick us off, and then we'd like to invite the other panelists to join in as they can. So to start the discussion, let's address the topic that's been so key to all of our lives over the last 15 months, COVID-19. So can you tell us how your work has had to pivot during the pandemic? What impact you've seen on girls' education? We got a little bit of that in some of our speakers' presentations prior to this, but maybe you can give us a bit more insight from your organization's perspective. And then how are we doing in trying to get back the gains we had started to make pre-pandemic? So I would like to ask Alicia to kick us off on this topic.
Thank you very much for that, Carol, and huge thanks for the Global Book Alliance for inviting the UK. You know, Helen spoke earlier on, and now I'm here as part of the panel. And you know, what a fantastic sort of theme for this, and what a fantastic work that the GBA does. I think all of us on this call are probably very fortunate to remember our first book, or to remember the book that really gripped us and got us reading, and therefore, you know, set us out on our learning journey. So the centrality of books in our lives, you know, is so important. But just turning to the questions that you've posed to us, you know, when COVID hit, as it were, just over a year ago, and lockdown started, we very quickly moved to pivot our bilateral programs. And we have bilateral programs in about 18 countries, you know, where we've got sort of deep investment in about 18 countries. And of course, we invest through a range of global initiatives as well. And this demanded, that pivoting demanded a strong focus on safety and child protection, particularly for girls, as well as stepping up support for remote learning, remedial and catch-up interventions, and supporting government with school reopening once it was safe to do so. When Helen spoke, she gave a few examples of what we have done across our portfolio. And indeed, she mentions that, you know, both she and I were in Ghana and Sierra Leone last week, and we saw, you know, firsthand the sort of responses of the UK government working with partners on the ground in order to pivot and to respond to the COVID crisis. Be it about you know, the response on technology, how you get teachers into a different space about how they learn, how you support ministries of education in order to have more resilient systems in the future. And you know, as the Minister for Rwanda would know, who's on the call or who was on the call, that, you know, for example, in Rwanda, we supported the government's national COVID-19 catch-up program based on the principles of teaching at the right level. We developed radio programs, about 180 of them, 80 lessons so far. We digitized appropriate student learning materials and organized virtual professional learning community meetings for head teachers and district officials to prepare for school reopening. So hopefully it gives you some sense of, you know, what we've been doing on the ground. At the global level as well, the UK announced £20 million for UNICEF crisis appeal, which included, you know, education, adding £5 million more to Education Cannot Wait, to fund emergency in fragile contexts, and a further £5 million to UNHCR. And those investments supported about another 4 million hard-to-reach girls who risk leaving education permanently after COVID-19, and enabled 5,500 teachers to continue teaching in refugee camps in about 10 countries around the world. You also asked, Carol, about the impact on girls' education. And you know, the pandemic, we know, has deepened and exposed existing inequalities, adding new layers of marginalization and exclusion, particularly impacting girls. And we are witnessing increased rates of gender-based violence. 2.5 million additional child marriages are expected in the next 5 years, and over 1 million adolescent pregnancies in the next 12 months. Again, referring to the visit that we had last week to Ghana and Sierra Leone, again, we saw firsthand, the impact on girls. Ministers of education in both countries were talking about the increasing levels of child marriage, increasing levels of pregnancy, and indeed the increased vulnerability of all children, in particular girls. We've also put in place good quality remote learning for marginalized children, but we know that is a big challenge because 75% of learners in low-income countries do not have access to online learning, and 31% do not have access to television and to radio. And Jaime and his colleagues at the World Bank have written quite extensively about that lack of access in a range of different contexts. Yet we know that these technologies have been some of the most popular approaches adopted by governments in response to the pandemic. And often girls find it harder to access remote learning at home due to the gender norms such as household chores. But we continue to work hard to adapt our education programs and to ensure that we reach the most marginalized girls. You also asked a little bit about what are we doing to try to get back the gains that we've started to make pre-pandemic. And Jaime gave some quite staggering statistics there about learning losses as a result of the pandemic. And we know that COVID-19 school disruptions may have caused learning losses equal to all of the learning gains that we probably made in the last 2 decades. And even before the pandemic hit, we had a learning crisis on our hands where 9 out of 10 children in low-income countries could not read a simple story by the age of 10. And Jaime spoke about that as well. So, we had a learning crisis pre-pandemic, and now we know that the learning losses have been added to that. Remedial education programs are a good start, but they don't deliver the step change needed to get SDG 4 back on track. These programs must now be combined with longer-term education system reform to address the significant gaps in children's foundational skills. And all governments must now step up their efforts to get children learning, whilst also ensuring education systems are resilient to future shocks. And for us as well, through our presidency of the G7 this year, we are calling on the international community to support the recovery of education globally by getting behind 2 new milestone objectives and 2 new milestone targets. That by 2026, we would like to see 40 million more girls in school and 20 million more girls reading by the age of 10 in low and lower middle income countries. So I hope that gives you a sense of how we pivoted, how we responded, gives you a sense of the impact that we've seen on the ground. We're trying to work with governments and a range of partners to respond to, and some sense about how we're trying to get back to to recoup some of the gains that we had made even pre-pandemic. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alicia. And now, LeAnna, I'd like to invite you if you'd like to add anything from the USAID perspective for this particular question, or Jaime, of course, you're welcome to join in as well.
Great, thank you, Carol. And I just want to check you can hear me. I've been having mic programs this morning. Okay, great, thanks. So first, I want to thank everyone who's joining us here today on this super important topic. USAID has been supporting the Global Book Alliance and in partnership with many other donors and multilaterals, and we appreciate the support of all of the partners on this. I would say on the COVID response that when we look at USAID's education policy, our focus is really on 2 main things. One is reaching the most marginalized children, making sure they have access to education, and the other is making sure that those kids in school are actually having impact, that they are having learning outcomes. And so we've really spent a great deal of time on how to measure learning outcomes and to really look at the impact of our education programs and national education programs. And I think when we look at how COVID is impacting the education system and globally how it's impacting education, those two things are more relevant now than ever. So we know that COVID is impacting equity issues. We know that, you know, we had a learning crisis pre-COVID, and now we have even more learning loss. So I think that our focus remains the same, but our approach has really needed to shift and change. And in some ways we take a two-pronged approach. So one, we're fortunate to have really strong country level staff and presence in about 50 countries working on education. And so we were able to really rapidly pivot our programming in those countries to help ministries of education respond to the COVID crisis. So we pivoted about 900 million in programming in about 40 countries over the last year. And part of what we found with that programming was we helped, for example, put in place more distance learning programs, but looking at low and no tech options in an area where internet wasn't an option. So how can we reach folks via cell phone? Many of our reading programs, our early grade reading programs, had already in place a community-based component where they worked with local NGOs, they worked with families and parents pre-COVID. And I think that those components proved instrumental in being able to rapidly pivot, working with those NGOs and communities to get lessons, learning materials, and other things into homes where we were experiencing school closure. So again, pivoting existing programs allowed a very rapid response. And then I think when you look at our work that we've done, you know, with FCDO and others as board members of the Global Partnership for Education and members of the Executive Committee of ECW, really supporting and kind of nudging those agencies to have some kind of response where governments could apply for additional funds. So we see that as, you know, helping countries have access to funding to mount their own responses to COVID while we were pivoting what was already on the ground. I would say there's also what's been really important is something that Alicia alluded to, and that's that we help respond to this immediate crisis, but we continue our work on the long-term systemic reforms that we were working on pre-COVID, working on learning poverty. Many of us are working really together in partnership with the World Bank to eradicate learning poverty, that we don't sort of lose focus on those things. I think it's just going to be critical, and it also is instrumental to building resilience into education systems. We know this probably won't be the last crisis of this nature, but by building resilience, we're also helping look at, for example, disasters caused by climate change. So we know flooding, we know drought, all of those things impact days of schooling, access to education. So I think in many ways, COVID is helping us look at how to be more innovative in delivering learning. A couple of other things that I think have been really important to look at, and one is, again, on the measurement of results. We've been taking a lot of time at USAID lately to look at how we measure the impact of distance learning. And I think we really have to ask ourselves, do we have the same type of learning outcomes? Are we able to achieve solid learning outcomes through distance learning? And how do we do that? And how do we make sure if you know, we're seeing an increasing call to invest in internet-based solutions, other types of distance learning, but I think it's really important for us to look at the measurement of learning outcomes through distance learning. Another area that I think is really important that USAID has been working on, but really, you know, kind of renewing our support to this is innovative financing. So we knew there was a funding crisis and a funding gap in education prior to COVID, and it began looking at innovative financing platforms and way to bring additional financial support into the education sector. We know that COVID actually has hit very hard some of these low fee private schools that many families have opted to send their children around. And so how do we make sure that those kids are not losing access to education. I think that all of that is really critical. And then I think I'd just like to stress the importance of partnerships. We knew it before COVID, but we know it even more strongly now. So in addition to, again, our work with FCDO, the World Bank and others, USAID also early on in COVID provided a grant to the International Network of Education in Emergencies to specifically look at how you deliver high quality distance learning in crisis and conflict settings. So just a few thoughts on that. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, LeAnna, for sharing USAID's kind of experience and your perspective on these challenges that we've been facing during COVID. I know we don't have a lot more time, but I would like to pose at least one more question to the group. And this one is going to focus more explicitly on books. So the Global Book Alliance is really focusing on ensuring that all children, both girls and boys, can access books in the right language, at the right level, and in the right place. And I would say also in using the right media, right? Thinking about both digital and print books. So are there specific programs or activities that your kind of teams and colleagues are engaging in that focus on ensuring this greater access to the right to books? And I will also slip in there, you know, Jaime mentioned this issue of gender representation. So if you have any thoughts about what work is being done to improve the quality of books, specifically thinking about gender representation, that would be welcome as well, but no pressure. So LeAnna, why don't we have you kick this one off this time?
Oh, thank you for having me kick this off, because it's one of my favorite topics. But really, you know, studies have shown that high quality reading materials and textbooks are one of the most cost-effective learning inputs, especially when in the local language or in a language that students understand. And I think Jaime referred to that earlier. Despite their importance, books are absent or in far too short of supply in too many classrooms and homes. That is to say, we have a book gap. We have a lot of gaps in education. We've got a financing gap, a book gap, gender gaps. But not only are there not enough physical books, but there are not enough publishers and authors producing stories and books in languages children use and understand. And this is in part why USAID not only funds the development of high quality books, but is also taking a market-based approach to ending literacy. So we're looking at the entire book chain, from forecasting and development to supporting authors, illustrators, reading specialists, to publishing, to distribution, and then equally important to the active use of books. And I want to say that I think, you know, as donors, multilateral, bilateral, we really need to move away from this model of funding the production of texts in individual programs, these sort of one-off textbook production or book reading production. We really need to look at developing these book chains in countries where we're working. And that's precisely why USAID supports the Global Book Alliance. You can produce the most amazing books in the world, but if the books are hard for families and schools to get, they won't make a difference. And then I just want to make another really important point about textbooks and reading materials. I think they can be instrumental in supporting other educational goals such as diversity and inclusion. For example, as we work to strengthen local publishing sectors, we can build capacity for local authors and publishers to develop materials that are inclusive and represent diverse characters in a positive light. So I want to give one great example of this, and it actually also touches on Jaime's example of not seeing girls in science books. One of the flagship activities of the Global Book Alliance is the Global Digital Library that's making tons of reading materials available online. You can read them on your cell phone, you can print them and read them. They're in a variety of languages with an emphasis on marginalized languages. And my favorite book on the Global Book Alliance is Grace in Space. It's really one of my personal favorites because Grace is a young girl who loves science and astronomy. Grace just happens to have a disability, which you see in the illustrations, but is never mentioned, and it doesn't stop her from pursuing her dreams. So Grace dreams of traveling in space, And I'm not going to tell you whether or not she makes it. I'm just going to encourage you all to go to the Global Digital Library and to look up Grace in Space. It's really one of the amazing stories that's so inspirational. I think, another important aspect of ensuring reading materials support learning outcomes is by integrating principles of universal design for learning into reading materials so they are accessible from the beginning of the book development process. So one example of this is from the All Children Reading, which is a grand challenge for development in a partnership between USAID, World Vision, and the Australian government. The Begin with Books Prize competition challenged innovators to produce high quality and accessible titles in underserved, spoken, as well as signed languages. One of the winners, the Rochester Institute for Technology, is a leading sign language storybook cohort to empower deaf people from more than 8 countries, including Somalia, Nepal, and Fiji, to create more than 500 new sign language accessible storybooks to be uploaded onto the Global Digital Library. So I think I could just speak for hours on this, but I will stop here.
Thank you so much, LeAnna, and I'm really glad that you shared with us Grace in Space. I hope everyone goes to the digital library afterwards and takes a look. We have about 2 minutes left, so that's 1 minute each for Jaime and Alicia, if you would like to jump in and add anything to this question.
I just want, I was wondering how we need to have Grace in Space in different languages. So while LeAnna was thinking, was how do I do that in Spanish? That rhymes could be so like Marisol llega al sol, or something like that. But I just want to say that because we need to emphasize the issue of having books in the right language, right? I mean, when kids start to read, I mean, children might know at least 15,000 words. 1,500 words by the time they start formal instruction in their native language, but they will know a few dozen words, right, in the official language. So actually, if we don't make sure that books are in their language, actually we're really wasting a lot of other investments. And the second point that I wanted to mention, and hopefully we'll have more time in another moment, is that this is extremely, when we want to make sure that we put books in the hands of children, this is extremely complex market. It's a market that we go to the economic side of this of the discussion. Is a market that is full of oligopolies. In many cases, there are a lot of corruption, collusion between providers. So we really need to work in terms of improving the quality and efficiency of the markets. So that is one of the areas in which we're trying to work in this read at home project. Work in improving the quality and efficiency of books market, talking about the whole both production and distribution system. And when we're talking about the distribution systems, another innovation in the read at home is a track and trace initiative that will allow the Ministry of Education to know, okay, these books that we have in here are the right books, right? Where they are at this moment. Are they in the ministry? Right? Are they already shipped to the local government distribution centers? Are they already in the school? So those looks like a very complex logistical issues, but if we do not solve them, right, it will be very difficult, right, to be able to make progress on this area. We can talk a lot more about procurement, logistics, distribution, materials, fonts, etc. But I just want to plant that there are a lot of details on this area that we really need to solve if we want to make sure that the outcome is there, and the outcome is a book in the hands of a child. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alicia?
Yes, and just a few comments from me, and I think LeAnna has I'm going to go and check out Grace in Space as well. Actually, you really kind of energize us to do that. So look, LeAnna spoke about the whole piece around procurement and cost-effective supply of books, and we certainly used that book supply chain analysis that was conducted by GBA, by the Global Book Alliance, for our work in Malawi, for example. So fully get you on that one. LeAnna kind of refers as well to the whole piece around, the diversity, within the books, and what is contained within those books, and the important piece that it can play, role it can play with respect to diversity and inclusion. So the representations within those books, relevant to the identities and the experiences of children with disabilities, of girls, and for children speaking, underserved languages, for example. So they're quite powerful tools to that extent. And then I guess maybe what I would like to add is that, the right books need to be part of a wider package of integrated support directed at ensuring that children gain those foundational skills. And therefore the books must be part of a package that includes, teacher professional development, community and parental engagement, and wider system strengthening. So in the interest of time, I would leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those final thoughts, Alicia, and thank you very much to all of our panelists, to Helen, to Dr. Valentine, all of you for your contributions today. We really appreciate you being here and helping us have this conversation. If any of you are interested, if any of our audience are interested, please go to the globalbookalliance.org to get more information about the work that we're doing and to sign up for our newsletter. And if you do that, you will also receive information about a second webinar that we're going to be holding. Obviously, we have a lot more to say on this topic, and so we are going to be hosting another webinar that comes at this from a slightly different angle later on in June. So please do sign up, and you'll get information about that when we have it. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to learning more about all of the good work that is being done on girls' education and books going forward. So goodbye,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.